Hello everyone, welcome to MJ Hobby Corner, to the MJ Hobby Corner office, our new little space for the channel. This is where we do all of our paperwork, all the creating of army lists and well, a bunch of stuff takes place here in the office. So, and the studio is a separate building right on our property. So that's for you guys that are new. Talking about new subscribers, welcome. Thank you for supporting the channel. And for those of you that are not new, that have seen these videos before, welcome back. So, for those of you that don't know, MJ Gaming Spotlight is a short series of videos, or a series of short videos rather, that talk about a specific game in my gaming library, and it's a game that I choose at random. I study it up a bit and then create this little video to talk about the game. It's a chance for me to geek out a little and to present, give a little exposure to these games. So, and every episode will have a slightly different, we'll have a different game. For this particular game, what we're going to talk about today, and it's Horizon Wars Infinite Dark. That is the game on Spotlight this week. For that game, I'm probably going to break the video down into two parts. Okay, I don't like these videos to be very long, so it'll be two parts. I think this game deserves that because there's a lot to it. Okay. It's not a overly complex game. It's in essence, it's a game that's easy to understand, but there's a lot of things that go to it. So rather than make one really long video, I'll cut it. Episode 1 this week and episode 2 next week. Okay, so episode 1 of this spotlight is going to talk about creating your fleets for Horizon Wars Infinite Dark. Now, that's interesting because when you first get the book, and I have a digital copy, so I'm going by the digital copy, not the hard book, right? As soon as you look at your copy of the book, you get an introduction with a little bit of fluff. Then you dive into how to create your fleet. That is 26 pages, okay? And you might think, whoa, damn, that's a lot for, it's really well organized, really well written, so it's not like you'll be stumped. And if you've played Horizon Wars before, the game of Horizon Wars, if you haven't heard of Horizon Wars, I do have a few videos. Julie and I have played each other, and if you haven't heard of Horizon Wars, check that out. I'll have a description in the playlist. This game runs very much like Horizon Wars in the core mechanics, the way the opposing roles work in Infinite Dark. It isn't an opposing role mechanic that drives this game. It's the same as Horizon Wars. Okay, so if you have played Horizon Wars, a lot of this is going to sound familiar, especially when we talk about the rules. Creating your fleets here, there's some similarity with Horizon Wars in that you take points and you have to allocate them to your various stats of the ship, and that kind of allows you a lot of freedom to customize that ship. So let's just dive right in. There's a lot to say about this section of the book. All right, so the game is written by Roby Jenkins, published by Precinct Omega Publishing. Okay, in the intro, you're hit right with the fluff, and the fluff, very, very basically, there's different stages to the fluff, right? Different eras that it talks about. The burning is it's an older age. This is where everything starts, and basically humans are going up into space and everything else. It seems that different spacefaring nations from Earth and their science vessels begin fighting each other. War begins to break out for various reasons. It doesn't really go into too much detail, but basically war starts, as is logical, I guess. All these scientific vessels are suddenly becoming armed, and so not so much for science anymore. That was the burning age, right? The burning era. And then it jumps into the colonial war era. Now, things don't get any better because as humans begin to colonize planets within our solar system, you get the colonial wars starting. Attacks on civilian vessels, traveling between Earth, Mars, and Venus. Interesting that it chose those 3 different planets, right? So I guess they managed to colonize these planets, but war breaks out, as it does, as supply ships are being attacked and everything else. So this is an era where the first space carriers with fighters are come into play, and creation of backup bodies for the human mind and advanced AIs. So all of a sudden, death is not as important anymore to humans, and war becomes something of an entertainment. Ooh, that's pretty crude. Okay, and then you get another era, and this is where the game starts. This is where us, the players, will begin to play, and it's the solar era of solar hegemony. That's the way the fluff puts it. Basically, jump gate networks are created, and humans begin to expand beyond the solar system, and that's why the game is named Infinite Dark, because humans begin to go into the infinite dark. There's a lot more about the fluff, but of course we're not going to go over all of it. So basically, one interesting thing that the author puts in, I wanted to mention this because it caught my eye. It says, Horizon Wars Infinite Dark nods politely to the physics of space combat. And this is talking in a theoretical, actual theoretical sense. To the physics of space combat, and ignores it completely in favor of having fun. I just thought that was interesting that they threw it in there. So basically, you know, we know that space combat has all this physics attached to it, right? And in space combat, there's obviously a lot of physics to it. However, ignore all that and just have fun. And that's what the rules are designed to do. I like that. So I just wanted to mention that. All right, so we left the fluff. We're in the rules. And this is where creating your ships comes into play. As I said before, the game mechanic is one of opposed roles with your opponent, or with tests, right, that you have to do. What you need to play. It recommends a play surface of 3 feet by 3 feet. That's not very big. So that's cool. Now, I'm sure you can have larger battles, you know, if you have more ships and whatever, but 3 feet by 3 feet is kind of the minimum. At least, because it does say at least, so you do go bigger. It uses D12s, so you're going to need at least 7 D12s. In Horizon Wars, you need like 10. So, interesting. You also need a normal deck of 54 cards. Now, that always grabs my eye because the mechanic here now is different. Okay, so you introduce cards, regular playing cards with the jokers, it says, and that just adds a whole other level to the mechanics. So that's cool. You will also need D8 or a D10, either or. Now that's interesting. When we look at the rules in the next video, we'll see what this is about, 1D8 or 1D10. And then, of course, your miniatures, and it gives you some scales in the book. It says it's very free with the basing, so if all your miniatures are based with round bases, it's okay. There's a template in the back of the book that will allow you to maneuver your ships. The book recommends hex bases. Just because of the way the ships maneuver, I guess hex shapes are easier, right? But you don't have to. They could be on square bases, round bases, whatever. It does state this. Miniature bases should be no bigger than 50 millimeters. Okay, so they're not going to be big. Although 50 millimeters is, you know, decent size. I would think space station or something like that would cover that size of base. You will also need 3 different counters, so that's good. Not too many counters. That often, when you have a game that has so many counters and you gotta like separate them into all these little trays or whatever. In this game, you'll need 3, which is power, advantage, and activation markers. Okay, so power is a resource. It's part of the stat of your ship. I'm gonna look at that in just a second. Okay, so assembling a fleet. So that's what you need to play the game. But then assembling a fleet, and this is where I had to kind of read the book and stop to think a little bit. You know, it was a little tricky for me to understand at first. So basically what I'm giving you is my understanding of what I read in this section. You have command levels. Command levels are very important because they dictate the scale of battle that you and your opponent are going to play. Not only that, but they are sort of related to command level gives you a relative size of your ship. So command level 1 would be like one-man fighters and mechs. And there are mechs in this game. So one-man fighter, small vessels. Then you go on to command level 2, which are larger vessels, but still small in the grand scheme of things. Things like recon ships, like scout ships, you know, maybe destroyers or something like that, right? Just vessels that are larger than fighters, but still not very large. And then you have command level 3, which is your big ships, your capital ships, heavy cruisers, battleships, carriers, those kinds of things. So command level does give you kind of a sense of size, but the most important thing that it does is that scenarios will often tell you what command level players will be playing in. So this is interesting because in most spaceship games that I've played, your fleet is varied. You have like fighters and all this stuff mixed together. In this game, you could be playing a game with just capital ships or a game with just starfighters. So the missions would be different that way. So command level is an interesting concept. Now, command level is also associated with, it tells you what arcs, what firing arcs your ships are going to have. So that was interesting. It is associated to another stat. And this command level is not a stat on your ships. Okay? It is not a stat on your ships. It basically gives you the scale that you'll be playing, right? Sort of an arbitrary scale for your fleet. Mass and power are 2 stats on your ship's little stat line. 4 secondary stats and mass and power, which are your 2 primary stats. So there's not a lot of stats to your ships, and that's good, okay? Because any more stats would tend to complicate things. So mass and power is very important. Mass, again, and it's not M-A-S-S, it's M-A-S. Mass is related to size as well, but it also dictates how many special abilities your ship can have, the total. Mass goes on a scale from 1 through 3, so there's only 3 mass scores. And power also goes on a level of 1 to 3. So there's only 3 scores that you can have for power. So that's good. Again, keeps complexity down. So mass 1 vessels, mass is interesting because let's say a command level 1 vessel, a fighter, could be either mass 1, 2, or 3. And that's what I wasn't getting, you know, at first. A command level 2 vessel, like a scout ship or whatever we just said, could also be mass 1, 2, or 3. So it's just telling you mass 1 would be the smallest vessel in that type, in that command level type of ship, right? So a mass 1, command level 1 would probably be a single seat fighter. That's the smallest you go, right? Then power will work with this in tandem. But first, mass 1 vessels get 2 traits or special abilities. They have a top move, or M, of 7. And you can only allocate up to 5 in each of these secondary stat scores. 5 points that you're going to... in just a second, I'll tell you how you get those 5 points. This is just like Horizon Wars, where you get a certain number of you get a presence, right? So presence 1, 2, or 3 for the max, light, medium, heavy. And then it gives you a certain number of points depending on whether it's P1, P2, P3. And then you allocate those points to your stats, and that's how you make your game. Your mech, right? Same thing here, except in this game, you multiply mass and power together, and that gives you the points that you will then allocate to those secondary stats. Our move, M, F, which is like your fight value, A, which is like your armor, and then defense. Okay, which include all the defense systems that your ship is going to have, shields, all that stuff. And that number, that is just like in Horizon Wars. All right, that's the number of dice that you're going to roll against your opponent. When your opponent attacks your ship, you're going to roll that number of dice, and any number that is the same as your opponent's roll, in your opponent's roll, you're going to remove those dice out of the pool, okay, the rolling pool. So again, when we talk about rules, we'll talk about this again. For those of you that played Horizon Wars, you know exactly what it means. Okay, so again, going back a little bit, command level dictates the type of ship, loosely based on class, and the scale of battle that you're going to play. Also helps to come up with the firing arcs for your ship. And then you have mass and power, which are your primary stats. Pilots. This is interesting. In this game, you're going to have pilots. Now, it says in the rule set that if you're beginning to learn the game, you haven't played this kind of game before, then maybe you don't use pilots at first. I like this because a pilot, it just includes the skills of the pilot into the whole, how good the ship is, right? So it's not just the machine that it's considering, for this idea, but also the pilot. And I like games that do that. It does add a little bit more complexity because there are a lot of rules for the pilot. Not so much rules as like abilities that a pilot can bring in to the ship. So having a pilot or a hero will give your ship bonuses on various aspects. It could be that the pilot is very skilled at maneuvering the ship, and so your maneuverability will get a +1. And that's what M stands for, by the way. So that's interesting. I do like that about the game. Okay, so now let's go to mass and power, two primary stats of your ship. I'm not going to go too much into pilots. In order to get the points that you're going to allocate to various secondary stats of your ship, by the way, all secondary stats, the 4 secondary stats like M, F, A, and D, those secondary stats, they all start with the number 2. All of them have that basic score in the beginning. You're going to add points to that to increase the various areas that you think would enhance the ship. Okay, so whether it's fight or move or whatever it is, you're going to allocate the points. So you multiply mass plus times power, and that gives you the points to allocate to your stats. And cost of ships thus vary from 1 through 9. Okay, so when you do this, so for example, if it's a mass 2 ship, it gives you an example in the book of a fighter. Okay, and if it's mass 2, power 3, then you're going to have 2 times 3 is 6. So you're going to have 6 points to allocate to all those secondary stats. If it's mass 1 and power 2, you're only going to have 2 points to allocate to each of those stats. Okay, so again, that relationship is very important. And at first it tricked me a little bit. It was a little difficult to understand, but I finally got it. Okay, so again, mass is a scale of 1 through 3, light, medium, heavy ships. Fighter could be mass 1, 2, or 3. It could be a larger fighter, maybe a 2-pilot fighter or something like that, or maybe a bomber or something like that. Okay, so command level and mass and power. Those 3 things you have to learn how to use them. Now, ancillary. This is a new word that they use to represent all your special abilities, all the special abilities of the ship, the trait, the equipment that the ship has. This really is what rounds out your ship, what gives it flavor. So ancillary are based, how many ancillary you get is based on mass. Mass affects this. Also pilots may affect this. So if it's a mass 1 vessel, you're going to have 2 traits, right? And if it's mass 2, it increases. Mass 3, they have the most number of traits that can be allocated to them. And you pick these. These are special abilities, and there's a whole list of them in the book. ancillary special abilities, and traits limited by mass. Okay, so I gave already an example of a Mass 1 ship. Okay, so we're going to stop there. That's where, that takes up the 26 pages of the book, really, because you have the tables. You also have examples of ships that are already created. That's very helpful, because if you want to play the game, not really dive into creating your ships yet, you just want to play the game, then you use those stats that of the already created ships, and you can get to playing the game right away. And that'll help you understand the rules and how the ships work. So by the time when you, after doing that, you go back and create your own ships, you'll have a better understanding of how to do that, of how the stats work. So it's great that the book includes these pre-made ships that you can use. Okay, so I'm really glad about that, because that's how I was able to make the connection between the different things. All right, guys, so I hope I don't want to make this video too long. So that was creating ships. Those are the main concepts, and that's what I really stick to. I try not to do an in-depth analysis. It's just a very informal talk to geek out and talk about games. When I have an example of my own examples of ships, I will present it in a video. And of course, the best way to learn any game is to play the game. One last thing about Infinite Dark that really attracted my attention: it has solo rules. You can play it co-op, and you can play it player versus player. So it's a very, very flexible system. Hope to have a couple of battle reports in the future of these different types of play. Okay, and that's the best way to learn any game. All right, folks, have a great one, and we'll talk in the next video.